Welcome to Watch the Booker Man and to the first episode in this WCW rebuild that doesn't begin where we left off from the last episode, and that's because if you remember the previous episode had the audio issues at the end. I recorded the intro to the next video in the same sitting as doing that, so unfortunately it was also bad audio quality. I could have tried to redo it, but I've decided just to start. We had the extensions of Reno, Jimmy Hart and Evan Courageous come through. We were also informed of Buff Bagwell's contract coming to an end, and I offered him not only a significant raise from I think $25,000 to I think he wants $31,000 now, so proof that his burial and then push has actually put him on a better footing in terms of what he can demand financially. Perhaps more importantly, we offered him a full 1 year deal, so some confidence for us that he will be a fixture of this company going forward. And I also declined to offer Kiwi a new deal, not because he's definitely going, but because I think along with Lash LaRue and maybe Mike Sanders, to be fair, he's probably my least favourite person that we currently have on our roster. And then I went through the pre-show stuff, which involved giving nobody the night off. We are in the southeast for tonight's show, so expecting more people than we usually do for a Nitro recording. And yeah, we got a few solid ideas in the creative meetings, one of which I have applied. No major incidents in the back or anything, apart from the usual issues between Charles Robinson and members of our backstage locker room. Probably need to look into changing or completely removing our morale officer at some point. I did use a creative idea on Mike Awesome for his character, which was a success. And we also applied a creative idea which was exclusive to Booker T to the World Heavyweight Championship storyline. Other than that, you can see on screen now the 5-match card for tonight's show, getting ever closer to our return to pay-per-view with WCW Starrcade 2001. But it was a pretty quiet week in terms of the day-to-day running of WCW, so you've not missed anything other than me probably rambling on for a few minutes too many. Let's go into Nitro. And we begin with a good segment. We've deployed that creative idea and it was a success, and I think this segment would have been pretty good overall, gaining heat to a storyline, advancing a couple of others, and that's because Shane McMahon comes down to the ring and the commentators put over the speculation from last week over whether Lance Storm was actually fired or basically what was going on, and that's been the talk of the wrestling world for the last 7 days. Shane McMahon comes out and explains that he was all set to say those two famous words to Lance Storm last week, but something Lance said has stuck with him. Arn Anderson, Ric Flair and a few other trusted confidants have also shared their feelings, and they all questioned in their own way the decision to just point blank fire Lance Storm. Shane of course felt that he was doing the professional thing by not letting his own feelings get involved in it, and it was more just he's the boss, an employee put his hands on him, he has to be fired. He reiterates it's nothing to do with Lance Storm's talent. Nobody has ever doubted that when the bell rings and inside the 4 ropes, Lance Storm is a very, very solid wrestler, and it's certainly not because it was too harsh of a punishment to fire him. Nothing would be too harsh for that man after how he's behaved for the last 6 months. In fact, the fighters that he spoke to said the opposite. Firing Lance Storm would let him off the hook far too lightly, and maybe Storm is right. Maybe that is how his father would do it, but he is not his father, and therefore Shane invites Lance Storm to WCW Nitro next week. He's going to give Lance Storm 2 options. However, he wants to give those options to him face to face, so he's not going to go any more into detail on that. Coming out from the back, Scott Steiner tells the WCW owner to shut the hell up. He's dealing with all this unimportant crap when he should be out here to name Scott Steiner the number 1 contender to the World Heavyweight Championship. He shouldn't even have to fight to get that title back. It should be handed to him. But after what he, Booker T, and everybody else in the back conspired to do against him, he's willing to beat the crap out of Booker T to get his belt back. Shane knows what he did back in March, and unless he wants the lid blown off the entire scam, then he'll do exactly what Scott Steiner says. Booker T is out not long after this as Steiner continues to rant at the WCW owner, and we see Shane trying to get a word in edgeways with Scott Steiner, but we all know that's not easy at all. Booker T though says he demands the match gets made, so both champion and challenger are desperate for this to be the World Heavyweight Championship match at Starrcade, and even before Shane can answer this, Ric Flair comes out to the top of the ramp. He's fired up after being named the special guest enforcer for the main event of WCW Starrcade, and he can't see any better option for that main event than Booker T versus Scott Steiner. There is so much history and hatred between these two men. He tells Shane he knows what he has to do. Ric Flair will make sure that this match goes down fairly and that the best man wins. All Shane needs to do is make the match. We get a bit of an exasperated sort of expression from Shane, or the way that he speaks, however he wants to put it across. This is an unscripted segment and everybody does actually do well off script. He says, fine, everybody here wants it. He's making the main event of Starrcade official. Champion and challenger then go nose to nose. Booker T telling Scott Steiner, we don't have to wait another 2.5 weeks for us to get our hands on each other. Shane McMahon has other ideas, however, pulling Booker T away from the confrontation. This, however, allows Scott Steiner to pull a steel pipe from his jacket and he clocks Booker T with it. So Shane McMahon trying to keep the peace, but very much it backfiring there with the World Heavyweight Champion down. Shane McMahon tells the challenger to get the hell out of the ring. He's got what he wanted. Why has he got to do this? And once at the top of the ramp, we get that stare down between Ric Flair and Scott Steiner, two men who, to be fair, at the end of WCW's run were on the same page, but we've switched it up there. Now Rick very much a defender of WCW, and Scott Steiner, we've dialed up that somebody who was already a pretty loose cannon is now even more off the rails. He's not taking instructions from anybody, that we can be sure of. We then go into the next segment of the show, returning from the break. That was probably one of the longest segments I've done. I think I did 15 minutes, so like a sixth of the show was just that opening segment. Not something I've done very often. I've normally kept opening segments like that to maybe 10 minutes, usually even 8 minutes. So a proper long but multifaceted segment. Of course, it technically was 2 segments. It was Shane setting up the Lance Storm thing for next week and making the World Championship match, and we're still not into the action on the night as we return from the break, and it's just a quick backstage thing that DDP arrived at WCW Nitro tonight with a look of intent in his eyes. 7 nights ago, he was attacked by Mike Awesome, and he is due to call him out later in tonight's show. A really good match. I saw the red note and worried there for a second. Chavo Guerrero carrying an injury. That does mean his performance comes out at 41, which isn't great, but Rey Mysterio very much carrying it with a 77. And while Chavo's still injured and I think will be fit for Starrcade, I just thought if he's not fully fit, I can afford to have him lose, and then when he's back 100%, we can then rebuild him as part of this Lucha Real stable. But it just feels like we had the debut of Rey Mysterio where we maybe saw a couple of minutes of him in the ring in that 3-on-3 match last week, and we're just going to the tried and tested. We know that Rey and Chavo have that chemistry. We know that they'll work well together, and the pretty good chemistry lifts us to a really, really good opening. And I'm feeling the way I felt about Rob Van Dam, about Rey Mysterio here. I think two guys who, they don't necessarily have the typical WCW main eventer aura about them, but that's exactly why this new WCW is perfect for them, and Rey Mysterio very much as a huge future. Like I say, him and Rob Van Dam could be A1 and A2 in terms of the faces in the company at some point, even if not in the traditional sense. Rey Mysterio then stands tall in the ring, following a convincing victory over Chavo Guerrero Jr. Chavo isn't squashed by any means, but it is, you know, the road agent knows whatever is, showcase Rey as much as you possibly can. He then gestures around his waist, indicating that he is coming for championship gold in WCW, and the commentators do note that he stated last week that it was AJ Styles and Sugar Shane's time in the Cruiserweight division, so maybe he's got his sights on a different championship, perhaps the United States Championship, which is held by the aforementioned Rob Van Dam. Dustin Rhodes is then in the office of Shane McMahon, and he says he understands that he's very, very busy, but have they heard back from the NWA regarding approval of the challenge that he made for the World Heavyweight Championship of NWA at Starrcade? Shane McMahon says that Steve Corino has been pulling all the political strings that he can. I don't want him to use the word political, but pulling all the strings that he can to try and block this match being made. But WCW management are still working on it. Dustin Rhodes requests time in the ring tonight to essentially make his case to the NWA committee without being interrupted by Steve Corino for a change. He wants to speak from the heart, down the lens to those people in charge of making those decisions, and Shane McMahon thinks that that is a great idea. Of course, we know the history that Dustin Rhodes' father, Dusty Rhodes, has with the championship, and while it may a little bit sort of minimise the individuality of Dustin Rhodes, I do think that in terms of this storyline, it does make sense for him to evoke the, I was going to say memory of his father there, Dusty Rhodes, very much still with us in 2001, but we have another person instead making a call out in the next segment as Diamond Dallas Page makes his way down to the ring. A very angle heavy show. It's going to be the case up until WCW Starrcade that we have these shows that are largely focused on the story rather than the in-ring, but in 2002 I'm planning to go to 2 hours, so it should be the case that we have more in-ring focus for 2002 while not compromising anything in terms of the storylines we want to lay out. He calls out Mike Awesome for the attack last week, and he's going to get round to kicking Mike Awesome's ass. There's no concern about that. But first he wants to know why Mike came after him, why now. Of course, we presented it as a random attack, and that's pretty much how DDP feels about it. Was he just lashing out because he realised that his meal ticket Lance Storm could be out the door? I mean, after all, we all remember what Mike was up to before Lance saved his career, and again, this is a segment where we give DDP, he's allowed to go out there and make fun out of what Mike Awesome was doing. Remember, he had the 70s guy gimmick, the fat chick Thriller, so he was turned into a joke, and Lance Storm did save his career, so it's fair for Diamond Dallas Page to make those comments, and that's kind of the point. Mike Awesome's so upset that everybody is constantly asking him about Lance Storm, but the truth is, where was he before he aligned with Lance? Mike Awesome comes out to the top of the ramp, and he's furious still that everybody wants to talk about Lance Storm. This isn't about Lance Storm. Last week, Lance was supposed to be fired, whereas Mike Awesome was out there in the ring fighting, yet after his match, they want to come and ask him about Lance. He has been kicking ass since the start of this year, and while he was fighting one of the toughest men on the planet at Uncensored, DDP sat stuffing his face with popcorn from the balcony. DDP wants to talk about riding coattails. DDP is riding off what he's done in the past. Since WCW came back, he has been nothing more than a passenger. Yet when it comes to Starrcade 2001, nobody seems to be asking where Mike Awesome fits into that card, but everybody knows that Shane McMahon will somehow find a spot for DDP without him even having to lift a finger. Well, Mike is killing two birds with one stone. He wants to be the man to give DDP a reality check on the 30th of December 2001. DDP says that Mike Awesome might have a point. If anybody ever paid a ticket or bought a pay-per-view because of him, DDP says to look around the building. He doesn't see many Mike Awesome signs in the crowd. Believe it or not, these people come out to be entertained, and Mike Awesome has spent the last year making Lance Storm look like he actually has a personality. Maybe that's the only reason that Lance has let Mike stick around, because he sure as hell isn't doing much of a job as the enforcer that he was hired to be. Why should DDP agree to face Mike Awesome when he won't even come down to the ring to face him like a man right now? Awesome lets out a frustrated laugh. He looks like he's tempted to go and fight DDP, but he says he knew DDP would try and play these games, but he's got a much better idea. How about next week? Awesome makes an example of DDP's buddy Dustin Rhodes, and when Page comes down to pick up the pieces, then he can come and accept the challenge. DDP comes out and talks, collects his paycheck and goes home, whereas Mike Awesome is about doing his speaking in the ring. Now, this is one of the best segments that we've had Mike Awesome in. I'm not under any illusion that he performed well in this segment. It literally says he performed poorly, and his microphone skills really are lacking when it comes to somebody like DDP, but I'm really happy to see that Dallas has managed to carry Mike Awesome to an entertaining segment. A 69 is good, 75 from DDP. It is dragged down further on, but like I say, gaining heat to a storyline that I think it's not where we wanted DDP and Mike Awesome to be come Starrcade 2001. Sometimes I think with big pay-per-view cards, you do kind of have a couple of people in reserve. Say maybe if Scott Steiner wasn't able to sign for us, then DDP would have slotted into that position. Maybe if the United States Championship match that I've got planned wasn't going to happen, we'd have moved pieces around. So you do need to have a couple of people in reserve, but the downside of that is that you have people who should be in featured storylines not quite having the direction they need in the build to the pay-per-view. Now DDP, I'm going to say, when he got that injury a couple of months ago, I just completely lost my way with him. He just was the sidekick to Dustin Rhodes, and when you look at their star quality, look at what they bring to the table, it really shouldn't be that way at all. So I don't think I've done a terrible job of booking him, and it kind of plays into what I've got planned for him going into 2002, and a few things that Mike touches on here is sort of going to be his character arc for 2002 or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's not where you would want and expect to see these two, even if DDP v Mike Awesome was one of the early matches that I had written down. I just had it as a much more important match than this, if you get what I'm saying, and hopefully the next 2 weeks we can make it at least feel like it matters somewhat. Booker T is then shown leaving the medical room, having been checked over following another attack by Scott Steiner earlier. He looks pretty annoyed to have once again been taken down by his Starrcade challenger. Booker is approached by Ric Flair, who tells him that he's going to make sure that Scott Steiner doesn't manage to repeat this again and again going into Starrcade. And of course, when it comes to the match itself, his job is to call it directly down the middle. But between him and Booker, he does think that Booker's one of the greatest World Heavyweight Champions that WCW has ever had, certainly the best in a very, very long time. And his feeling is that Booker T is what's best for WCW, but he wouldn't insult Booker T by doing anything other than being completely fair when he's at ringside for the World Heavyweight Championship match at Starrcade. Booker T thanks Ric Flair for his support, congratulates him on his new role in the company, and while Ric does thank Booker T, he doesn't rule out that after Starrcade it might be Ric Flair coming for the World Heavyweight Championship, and if Booker's still got the title, then he'd love to share the ring with him, but of course that isn't up to these two men, so they leave it at that. But very much amicable, respectful relationship between Booker T and Ric Flair. And I've seen a few clips of Booker talking about Ric, so I know that these two sort of had a good relationship around this time, and we're going to play again into that in the build to Starrcade. We then have a heel-heel match, which is probably why it doesn't rate too well, but it is Big Van Vader versus Buff Bagwell. Shane sort of punishing Buff Bagwell for just saying the wrong thing at the wrong time last week. Surprise, surprise, Buff Bagwell putting his foot in it. And the idea here is that Big Van Vader is again dominating the match as the Sandman did last week, but as Buff begins his comeback and sets up for a blockbuster, Kanyon, who was at ringside or runs out, whatever, it doesn't really matter, he pushes Buff from the top turnbuckle, and it actually causes a DQ victory for Buff Bagwell. So he's 2 wins for 2 since returning to Nitro, but neither of them have been particularly convincing, but a 59 is okay, and I think the fact that it was heel-heel will have pretty considerably affected the match, but I don't think even as a face heel you're going to get much more than probably a 60 from these two at this time. We're not yet officially turning Buff Bagwell face though, because while he's facing a heel here and in the next segment is going to be attacked by 3 heels, I have a particular moment in mind where we just say, okay, Buff Bagwell's a good guy now, it may well come on the biggest show of the year. Entering the ring after the referee calls for the bell, Kanyon and Kurt Hennig lay into Buff Bagwell along with an angry Big Van Vader. Once they have sufficiently laid into Buff, Big Van Vader sets up for the Vader Bomb, crushing Buff Bagwell under his weight. While Buff Bagwell may have been trying to make amends recently and show that he is a changed man, the commentators note that there is nobody in the back who would consider Buff a friend, and certainly not one who would risk coming against the Triad to do so. Crowbar not at Nitro tonight, otherwise I'm sure he'd have been there. But yeah, the idea here is that Buff Bagwell might be a nice guy now, he might be changing, he might be growing as an individual, but he still doesn't have any friends, and let's be fair, there's no reason why any of the faces would like him. I did have sort of in the back of my mind, I wanted Buff and 2 faces versus the Triad as a match on Starrcade, and that would pretty much have rounded out all the people who I consider sort of mid-card, upper mid-card and main eventers. Everybody would have been used on the show then, but I basically can't find the faces who I think would work with Buff Bagwell. Now, I did think Dreamer and Sandman, but it just seems too out there, especially after the match they had last week. I can't quite, because we've not had any real issues between Triad and Extreme Outsiders to bring back together, it just doesn't quite fit. So I've got another idea that does involve all these guys, but it's not quite as good. But unfortunately, I just couldn't find the people who I thought would be good partners for Buff Bagwell that I also feel deserve to be on the Starcade card. Catching up with Rey Mysterio in the back after his victory earlier tonight, Scott Hudson asks the recently returned star about the gesture around his waist from earlier. Which championship is it that Rey Mysterio has his sights set on in WCW? Before Rey Mysterio can answer, Billy Kidman walks into the shot. Billy asks if the Filthy Animals are going to go for the World Tag Team titles once more, because if not, then Rey Mysterio needs to realise that he doesn't get to walk in here and jump the queue. Rey Mysterio shakes his head at Billy Kidman, asking, what happened to you, man? We were cool, we were boys. This Billy Kidman, I don't know what's wrong with him. Billy tells Rey he can kiss his ass. He's going to show him exactly what happened to him next week. He might be the new flavour of the month. Everybody's so excited to see Rey Mysterio back in WCW. But if his sights are on the United States Championship, then Billy Kidman is going to stop that dead in its tracks next week. So Billy Kidman versus Rey Mysterio, a pretty big match, I'd say, two former stalwarts of the Cruiserweight division. I'm thinking I might open next week with that, actually. I've got another match penciled in to open next week, but this one I think is much, or it could main event. Yeah, I don't need to think about that right now, do I? Dustin Rhodes makes his way down to the ring and cuts a passionate, unscripted promo. I specifically did it unscripted because, well, I'm sure Dustin Rhodes could evoke the history of the National Wrestling Alliance much better than I can, particularly his father's role in the company and the reigns that man had, the American Dream, a former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, of course. Rhodes says that he means no disrespect when he says that the organisation and their championship isn't quite as prominent as it used to be. And he says that in part, Steve Corino is responsible for dragging that title further through the mud, more than perhaps anybody else, with his actions since appearing with that title in WCW. But he feels that Starrcade 2001 would be the perfect night to put the NWA back on the map and to showcase the most historic championship in all of professional wrestling. He's basically appealing to the NWA board. Make this moment a night that nobody would ever forget. The NWA World Heavyweight Championship defended on Starrcade for the first time in however many years, and I probably should have looked into that myself, but Dustin Rhodes is unscripted, so I'm sure he has that knowledge to hand. Dustin Rhodes, like I say, making this play, simply make this match happen. At the end of his promo, Steve Corino comes out to the top of the ramp looking to interrupt him, but what we're putting across here is that Dustin Rhodes is so fired up and passionate about this that he just overpowers Steve Corino. This isn't happening tonight. This has nothing to do with you anymore, Steve Corino. But in 7 nights' time, he expects Steve to pick up the phone to the NWA and deliver the message. Whether it's a yes or a no, he'll see Steve Corino next week for the answer. Now, it's a solid segment, loses heat to the storyline, but I do think Dustin Rhodes has done alright here with a 56. A 54 for the first part isn't too good, and Steve Corino, as he often does, drags his segments down, but I do think this as a separate thing almost on Starrcade, if you know what I mean, so it doesn't feel like a WCW match, and that's kind of what makes it interesting and unique. Hopefully, again, another storyline. Plans have changed on pretty much every single idea I had for Starrcade 2001. We've been through multiple potential challenges for Steve Corino, and this is the one that we have eventually landed on, and I hope that it delivers when it comes to the night. We then get a Cruiserweight tag team match where Lucha Real, the Cruiserweight champion Juventud Guerrera, and his partner Psicosis defeat Super Crazy and Tajiri, and I made the decision for Psicosis to pin Super Crazy, albeit after using underhanded tactics. Another really good match. I've just spotted a 68 rating. Did I just do this as a regular match? I think I did. Yeah, because I didn't want Yoshihiro Tajiri to be the sort of weak link in the match, and actually 3 of the men in the match got a 56. Juventud as the champion understandably getting a little bit better, and it shows how hot this storyline was because a 68 rated match brings the storyline down, so that's really, really good to see. I'm very happy with that. But with sights set on the Cruiserweight Championship match for Starrcade, this was a chance for Super Crazy and or Tajiri to prove their worth as a potential challenger. However, we're essentially saying that in their first ever defeat as a tag team, we might note, this sort of eliminates them from contention. So I'm sure Super Crazy and Yoshihiro Tajiri will at some point in 2002 get their hands on the Cruiserweight title. but it's not going to be this year that they are in that featured match. And yeah, we put across that this is the first defeat. I think they've had 12 tag team matches together or something like that, and this is the first time Tajiri and Super Crazy have lost. Lucha Royale do stand tall in the ring, and we put over that AJ Styles and Sugar Shane will be the ones who next week get their opportunity. It's going to be AJ and Sugar Shane versus Lucha Royale, and Shane says that it's been confirmed that if AJ Styles and Sugar Shane win that match, then both members of the team will get a shot at the World Cruiserweight Championship at Starrcade. If not, then on the Go Home show on December the 26th, everybody's going to go back into the pool, so it'll probably be AJ, Sugar Shane, Tajiri, S Crazy, maybe some other cruiserweights, all going into a match to earn the shot at Juventud Guerrera on WCW Nitro, but that's only if AJ Styles and Sugar Shane are unable to beat the Lucha Royale pairing on next week's episode. We then have another one of these segments that pulls multiple storylines together up next, unfortunately losing heat to one of them, but it's certainly not a terrible segment by any means. Ric Flair and Shane McMahon are speaking in the back, with Ric Flair talking about how he is making it his responsibility to ensure that Booker T and Scott Steiner both make it to Starrcade as close to 100% as possible. Moving on, Shane McMahon is asked what his decision on the Lance Storm situation is. Shane says that he's given Ric Flair and Arn Anderson's words a lot of thought, and he's going to give him the choices that they suggested. Lance Storm can either fight him at Starrcade, or he can walk away from the company and accept that he's been fired. Storm is going to be taught a lesson by Shane McMahon. One way or another, it's completely up to him which way he chooses. Walking into the office, Christian Cage tells the man in charge that he's not feeling too well, and Andrew Martin has offered to take his place in tonight's main event. Shane says that he's sorry to hear that, but says that, don't worry about it, you don't have to compete tonight. In fact, just to make sure that Christian Cage has the best chance of recovery, he's going to scratch Christian's name off the Starrcade card, and they can see how he feels a little bit closer to the time. All of a sudden, Christian Cage feels a whole lot better and says there's still another match between now and the main event. He's sure, he's already feeling better. He's sure he can battle through this. And in that case, he asks Arn Anderson to take a proposal to the Natural Born Thrillers, a gentleman's agreement that Andrew Martin and Sean O'Haire will stay in the back for the main event. We saw how crazy and chaotic that got last week, and he wouldn't want another big match for Shane McMahon to go off the rails, so he's doing Shane a favour in asking that Andrew and Sean both stay in the back. He adds that according to this I'm not sure why that last sentence is there. Is there anything else after this? No, so that's basically it, but Arn Anderson is going to deliver that message. There's a little bit of confusion as to why Christian would want that, but it seems like that's what he's requesting. We then get a okay match. I'm just going to look at the performances more than the match rating. Hugh Morrus, really good. Sabu, best of the bunch, and decent performances elsewhere, other than Brian Lawler, who, as well as being penalised due to being in extremely poor form, is just not that good in general. He's not been booked well, he's not massively over, and his performance skills aren't fantastic either. But he takes the pinfall, a diving leg drop, probably with a chair through a table from Sabu, and we kind of want to do a thing during the match where Brian Lawler thinks that he can be as crazy and as extreme as Sabu, and just he's completely couldn't be further from the truth, could he? Just the idea that he thinks he's crazy and then he comes face to face with an actual crazy person, and yeah, we're talking very, very different versions of crazy when it comes to Sabu and Prince Brian Lawler. We also have Hugh Morrus taking a stump up during the match, and that was sort of designed to protect him. He was on, I think, a 9-match winning streak before this, and of course he's not taking the fall here. I'm thinking something where maybe like a cane shot that sends him from the stage to the floor through tables or something like that, something that's a stunt bump, so not quite a crazy bump, but something that you can sort of focus on and say, well, Hugh Morrus was taken out of contention and then the match sort of ended as it did, but it still keeps, in my opinion, Hugh Morrus somewhat strong that it took something so big to take him out of the way, and that's because as much as I disliked him at the start of this save, he's one of my favourite characters, not going to lie. Taking a microphone from ringside, Tommy Dreamer turns his attention to Jerry the King Lawler, asking him if he was watching closely, and during the match we can say that Dreamer maybe dragged Brian Lawler towards him and sort of did some shots in front of him, but there was always somebody, Hugh Morrus or Nelson Knight, to stop Jerry Lawler from getting hurt by anybody else. He looks around and points out that The King is now all alone, his court has been taken out, and it's clear that the Extreme Outsiders have something very specific in mind. Lawler gets himself out of there as quickly as he can, and while Sabu wants to give chase, he is held back by Tommy Dreamer. The Sandman says it's fine, Jerry can run, but he can't hide forever. He'll be back in that seat this time next week. And as we've said, there are no members of the King's Court left standing. It's just you, Jerry. And the only way that they don't escalate this even further and completely obliterate the three men in the ring is that if next week Jerry the King Lawler grows a set and agrees to face Sabu at Starrcade 2001, Tommy and the Sandman can't lay their hands on Jerry, but this man certainly can. And they say, well, if you say no, that's fine, but things aren't going to end well for Prince Brian Lawler. And this is now becoming a chance of, will Jerry the King Lawler fall on his own sword to protect his son, or is it going to be the case that we have to follow through with the threats that the Extreme Outsiders are making? Again, another thing we'll find out on next week's show. Rob Van Dam is then interviewed in the back, putting over his victory from last week. He says that he heard Billy Kidman is going one-on-one with Rey Mysterio next week, and he'll have a close eye on that match. If Rey Mysterio does have his sights set on the United States Championship, then Billy Kidman is the guy to beat, because last week he did give Rob Van Dam one hell of a fight. He doesn't like him personally, but there's no doubt in his ability in the ring. RVD says that he will appear on next week's show to speak about his match at Starrcade 2001 and who might it be that he will defend the United States Championship against. So one of the first weeks where RVD hasn't been a prominent figure on WCW Nitro. This is his only involvement, and I did try and squeeze something in that was more significant for Rob Van Dam, but it's just one of them. Sometimes the cruiserweights I don't have time for, sometimes it's the United States Champion I don't have time for, other times it's going to be the tag team division, for example next week, that I don't specifically have anything in mind for just yet. So that's just kind of how things go, isn't it? In a good match that main events, and good is an understatement, this is one of the best matches that we've had, and Christian Cage proving his worth. Rey Mysterio, Rob Van Dam, Christian Cage are absolutely levels above a lot of the other people in this company, and he defeats Chuck Palumbo in 10 minutes and 26 with an unprettier after distraction from Andrew Martin. And basically it was a gentleman's agreement, and we're not dealing with gentlemen when it comes to Christian Cage and Andrew Martin, so they just basically screw him over. The match designed so that the wrestlers could go out and steal the show, and I'd argue that they've done just that. It's a 68 in terms of the wrestling itself, but probably the storyline and the fact that we said it to steal the show has given us an overall of 79. Really happy with that. And yeah, there's sort of not much more to say other than to highlight the fact that, as I was saying last week, Booker T, Rob Van Dam, and to a lesser extent DDP have been the fixtures of the main event scene, but we're now seeing that the likes of Rey Mysterio, Christian Cage are able to step up and give us those main event level performances, at least for TV matches certainly. Really happy with that. And to drag a 79 out of Chuck Palumbo, I might actually look after we've gone through this show at what the previous highest rated match Chuck Palumbo was in, because I'm going to say it was likely several rungs below that. I think he might have been in a match that Rob Van Dam and Booker were in, and maybe Team Canada got him to maybe a 71 or 72, but since I can't remember, I won't labour the point too much. We do lose heat to the storyline, but with another really good segment to end the show. This is a mid-card title, a mid-card storyline, but we're really seeing Christian Cage and Andrew Martin elevate this up to the next level. And after the match, Cage and Martin, they know what's coming. They know that Sean O'Haire is going to come and make the save, but this is their brief opportunity to get a few extra shots in on Chuck Palumbo. O'Haire sprints down to the ring, takes down Christian Cage with ease. He's just been through a pretty grueling match and gets clotheslined to the outside, but Sean O'Haire turns face to face with Andrew Martin. The two big men who had to be pulled apart backstage last week, if you remember, look ready to come to blows before Cage gets Martin to back down. He says, don't worry about it, it's not worth getting into the fight now when we have a week, 2 weeks to strategize for what we can do next. The challengers head up the ramp as Sean O'Haire checks on Chuck Palumbo to end the show. Having been calm and composed for much of their time as champions, that's kind of been the overriding characteristic that they've had, that they're just so chill, they're so confident, and they're so much above the rest of the tag team division that they've just managed to have a pretty easy life. we see that the effects of recent weeks are now starting to take a toll on Sean O'Haire. He is angry and he is fired up and ready for this big Starrcade match, and we do not have another segment after this. We wanted to give the opportunity for this main event to be the proper main event, to take the marquee place on the show, and it's just sort of, it was a test. It was saying, Christian Cage, can he carry a show on his own? Can he be, as people in the comments have been saying, that top level main event star? I've maybe underestimated him. People have said that I seem to be doing a slow build with him, that they would have liked to have seen him come in, even competing for the World Heavyweight Championship at Starrcade, which I still feel would have been a little bit early. But what this is proving is that those people are right, and maybe I have underestimated Christian Cage, but I gave him the opportunity tonight, and he has hit it out of the park, and that's only going to stand him in good stead for the rest of 2001, and perhaps more importantly, the beginning of 2002. Tori Wilson and Billy Kidman, who are dating, have started hanging out a lot recently. Such a notable thing. I'm so glad that it told me that. Otherwise, I would have just thought that they were pen pals. But yeah, I will just quickly check the Chuck Palumbo thing that I mentioned, because I did say that I would. And yeah, his previous best match was 74 against Team Canada, so not a million miles off, but a singles match where we know that the likes of Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire can be a little bit more exposed. It's definitely good to see, even if it was arguably a bit of a carry job from Christian Cage, but those are the people who weren't used on tonight's show and who we will likely be using on this episode of WCW Worldwide. So if any of those names on screen interest you, stick around, because yeah, Worldwide's coming next. So Worldwide kicks off with what I think could be a really good match, but of course, because it's got unimportant people in, the crowd are not invested in. Still gets a 35, but yeah, I've put it as a high spots rated match. Apparently the crowd aren't hot enough. Presumably we've made them wait too long between the hot ending of WCW Nitro and the beginning of Worldwide. I expected the crowd rating should carry on, so I didn't think it'd be an issue, but it is. Cash pins Evan Courageous with a double underhook pile driver. A match revolved around high spots. Everybody apart from Jamie Noble doing pretty well, but Cash really is, of this sort of group of 8 in this match, the person who I'm most interested in pushing at the minute. I think he can be a real major player as a singles guy in the Cruiserweight division, mainly because he's just got that attitude and personality that I've not yet seen or not yet had an idea for with these other guys. But there we go, that's the decision. Cash and Noble stand tall in the ring with Jimmy Hart going out from the back, and he just puts over the tag team wrestling that we've seen from the Cruiserweight division, not just on Worldwide but also on Nitro. He says that the teams have really impressed him, and there are talks going on behind the scenes of something coming for these guys in 2002, so he suggests they all keep working hard, keep working together and sharpening their chemistry, and he suggests that other guys, perhaps guys who aren't being featured in the same way currently, they do the same. Being a cruiserweight and having some good friends in the back may just serve you well going into 2002. We then get a segment where Diamond, Swinger, Gas and Rodney are scheming in the back. They've just watched their current rivals lose a match, and they're sort of just wondering what they can do next to get under the skin of 3 Count and the Young Dragons when they are confronted by Guido's CIA, and he kind of says, I warned you, let's make an example of you, and he proves that his words aren't just words when the CIA beat down Swinger, Diamond, Gas and Rodney. They then walk off, having sent a message to some guys in the back. A video package airs recapping the rivalry between Crowbar and Jet, beginning with their partnership throughout their association with Kanyon, and then into a very personal feud, which will end tonight in a submissions match. A okay match with Jerry Lynn putting in a good performance as he defeats Lash LaRue in 2 minutes and 36 with a cradle pile driver. He stands tall. Another win for Jerry Lynn, although of course he's not been featured prominently as you would expect from a steal from WWF essentially, but I do have something for him next week or maybe the week after, it depends how I decide to do it, and he will be making his Nitro debut. Jet is interviewed about the main event and does a good job as he is speaking about Crowbar, but flips out when asked by Paisley about tapping to Crowbar in the middle of the ring 2 weeks ago. He says that when the bell rings, when it's an actual match, there is zero chance of a repeat of that. So very, very confident from Jet. Queewee's Couch, we have David Flair on there as a guest. This is a segment I'm so unenthusiastic about, I can barely even bring myself to read it out, but the host talks to David Flair about his recent misfortunes and asks why he isn't dipping into his father's bag of dirty tricks. Of course, David Flair has been a babyface throughout this save. Maybe you'd get some wins if he decided that he too could be the dirtiest player in the game. David Flair flips out of this suggestion. He feels that Kiwi is mocking him, tells him to watch who he's talking to. He best remember that damn right he is the son of Ric Flair, and in case Kiwi missed Nitro, that means a hell of a lot now in WCW, even though obviously it's always meant a lot. Kiwi tries to get the interview back on track, but Flair's a bit of a prima donna here, and eventually another question from Kiwi upsets him and he storms off. Kiwi doing well without a script while David Flair didn't, and it's just one of those where you give people enough rope to hang themselves, and David Flair has yet to do anything to impress me in the 6 months of this save. Crowbar talks about the main event match also, says that we've seen what happens when it's just the two of them, no distractions in the middle of the ring. He beat him in their no DQ match a few weeks ago, but tonight he is going to make Jet definitively tap and prove that he is the better man. Now, based on their promos, it is in fact Jet who's the better man, but we'll see who comes out on top during the main event. Christopher Daniels makes his entrance for his match with Mike Sanders, but he's attacked from behind and laid out by Sanders, who doesn't feel he should have to be facing somebody at such a low level, despite losing all his matches. He then gets on the microphone and starts talking trash, pointing out that last week he took Chuck Palumbo, a champion in this company, to a limit, and now he's back to facing guys like Christopher Daniels. Give him a break. He's took Daniels out, and you know what? He doesn't even have to compete tonight because he's got something to say. However, he's interrupted by Jimmy Hart, who tells him to be careful what he wishes for. You never know who's hanging out at the back at Saturday Night Worldwide. Hart brings out Sanders' new opponent for tonight, who beats him in 1 minute and 3 seconds. Sean O'Haire over Mike Sanders with a Sean Torn bomb. A decent performance from Sean O'Haire. Mike Sanders doing the duties as the jobber, and a segment rating of 49 isn't too bad. Might well be the best match on the show. Sean O'Haire stands tall. He has destroyed Mike Sanders, and it's allowed him to get out those frustrations that we mentioned on Nitro. He's not been in the best mood for the last few weeks, so it's probably a familiar punching bag for him to let out some of that frustration. We then get a video package highlighting some of the key moments in the history of Starrcade. Probably wasn't a good idea to do this because, as you can see, it's lost heat to the storyline, but it probably would have been sort of 3 or 4 segments dotted throughout Worldwide, but I couldn't be bothered for the sake of what it would have been to put 4 different segments on highlighting moments from the history of Starrcade. It's probably something we're going to keep doing on Worldwide until the pay-per-view, but I might have to rethink how I do it because, of course, if it's only getting a 64 rating, then I don't really want it affecting the main event storyline. Yeah, perhaps consider it more dotted throughout the night that we're just hyping up that Starrcade's coming and what a historic event it's been throughout WCW's time as a company. Jimmy Hart is then interviewed in the back. He's not interviewed, he cuts a promo promoting the upcoming main event. He's just pointing out that no matter what happens, as long as he is in charge of Worldwide, this will be the end of the rivalry. He is not going to book Crowbar v Jet, regardless of how this match ends. He takes time to put over both competitors in a big way. He's seen them make themselves stand out from the very, very bottom of WCW, and they've made it to this main event position. I'm not going to pretend it's the top of the company by any means, but it could be a launch pad for one of the two of them, and only one can win tonight by making the other tap out. And the real reason for this was that I wanted to gain heat to the storyline, and I knew that Jimmy Hart was a considerably better promo and a little bit more over than both Crowbar and Jet. Now, I did get the note in the booking analysis that I've used Crowbar and Jet too much. I don't think it'll affect their match, but I think I'll get the red note at the end. A 50 is decent. The crowd not really up for it. I don't blame them after sitting through this Worldwide. I'm not a massive fan of the show myself, and it is going to again be something that changes in 2002. I'm going to try and do a bit of a softer brand split, and currently I have to do either 4 7-minute matches or a couple of long ones and a couple of short ones. I'm going to try and do a brand split so that I can change the product of the B-Show brand so that I can then have like maybe 60% matches, because I think if the whole point of this is to get the lower guys experience, it feels pointless to be having those 5-minute segments with Kiwi and David Flair and then put in Jerry Lynn, Mike Sanders in like 2-minute, 3-minute matches. It just seems like the time would be better served with short promos. We still want to develop characters for people, but I don't want to have to do every single week an in-ring promo at the end of a taping that you've already watched a lot of segments in Nitro. So yeah, to me, it should be more of a in-ring based show. But the way our product's set up, I basically need 30 minutes of angles on every single episode of Worldwide, and it just makes it boring for me. With that said, Crowbar defeats Jet in 11 minutes and 50 with his Rings of Saturn submission. I'll add that to his moveset after this show because that is now his finisher, or his submission finisher. We did send them out to steal the show. Jet was better than Crowbar, but I wanted the babyface, the underdog, and I think he is quite a likeable figure, Crowbar. I wanted him to win over Jet, who by his association with the Triad, I think, can come out of this and do okay for himself, whereas I think Crowbar, if he loses this rivalry, then he just goes back to being a complete nobody. Crowbar has his arm raised in the ring, having made Jet tap out following that grueling battle, and it's a bit of catharsis. He's been very much downtrodden, not had the best time of it, to be fair, since the start of the save, so I just wanted to give Crowbar a big moment, and hopefully it can be a launch pad for him. I mean, he's likely to still be a unimportant figure, so it's hard when there's so many people I want to build up in the company to have somebody like Crowbar anything other than a low mid-card guy, but it's something for him, isn't it? It's better than him losing, and like I say, I think Jet's going to be absolutely fine with it. I'm just going to add that move to his moveset and check if we've had any popularity growth for him. I wouldn't expect it, given it was just a match on Worldwide, but a 1-year deal signed for both Bagwell. I did think there was a chance when we got to this renewal for him that he would be leaving the company if his rebuild, so to speak, didn't go well. Now that is a good episode of WCW Nitro, no doubts about that, and I'm going to see where it sits in our top 100s. I think it's in the top 5, it looks like, and the match between Christian Cage and Chuck Palumbo comes in at number 8, so I'm certainly happy with that. Really good to see everything go into plan. If you remember a few months ago, I was pretty down on the save. I'd started pretty badly. I wasn't booking sort of to the strengths of the ratings in the game, and I think that really did cost us early on. I had a few shows that didn't even reach the 65 minimum that we needed to not get kicked off USA Network, which seems pretty unfathomable now just a couple of months later. So it does show that we have made that quick progress that people did promise me it would be the case in comments, but there were times when I did question whether I would be able to do anything with this company long term. I basically figured out if you put Booker T or Rob Van Dam in a main event, you should be okay, but it's going to be the Rings of Saturn added as a finisher for Crowbar, who we see is still considered unimportant. I don't think we've seen any real major changes in this, although Rob Van Dam was briefly a star, and now he looks to be back down to well known just because we did a week without him working. So fluctuations will happen, and I can see from our roster here there is a big chunk who are considered recognisable, as well as that big chunk, almost a full page, considered unimportant. Not good to see, but that is this week's episode. We are just over 2 weeks now to Starrcade 2001. I did actually say that in the intro that was lost. I am changing Starrcade. I don't want it to be Starrcade XIX because I don't think that was something that, it's not something I'm aware that WCW ever did. I will also change it to 3 hours because that would be really annoying. I think long whole year is ideal, but I think I will do it so that Starrcade 20 is called Starrcade 20. WrestleMania, of course, XX. We'll be going with Starrcade XX next year, but that is another show on the build to Starrcade done and dusted, which is very, very good to see, and I hope you'll join me next time for another episode, which is set to feature many, many more major developments and a few more matches being made for the big pay-per-view that is coming around the corner. Cheers.